Have you ever wondered how some people thrive in conditions where survival seems nearly impossible? Imagine living your entire life surrounded by towering mountains, freezing winds, and air so thin it feels like you're breathing through a straw. For most of us, even a short visit to such an environment would be a struggle. But for the Himalayan people, it's home, a place where they not only survive but thrive. What makes this possible? Is it sheer determination, centuries of adaptation, or something far more profound, something encoded in their DNA? The answer lies in a genetic story that stretches back tens of thousands of years. The Himalayan region is a land of extremes. Home to the world's highest peaks, it pushes the limits of what humans can endure. The air at these altitudes holds 40% less oxygen than at sea level, temperatures plummet below freezing, and resources are scarce. Yet, despite these challenges, the people of the Himalayas have built lives here, thriving in conditions that would leave most of us gasping for breath. What's even more fascinating is that their ability to adapt isn't just a product of the environment, it's deeply rooted in their biology. Over thousands of years, natural selection has fine-tuned their genetic makeup, equipping them with unique traits that make survival at these altitudes not only possible but almost effortless. But how did this happen? What secrets are hidden within their DNA? And how did they evolve to become the masters of the mountains? As we unravel their genetic history, we'll uncover answers that not only reveal the resilience of the human spirit but also hold the potential to revolutionize our understanding of health, biology, and even the future of our species. Stay with us as we embark on a journey into the heart of the Himalayas, a journey to uncover the genetic secrets that have shaped these remarkable people and allowed them to flourish in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Because sometimes, the answers to life's greatest mysteries aren't written in books, they're written in our very DNA. To truly understand the genetic secrets of the Himalayan people, we first need to ask a fundamental question: where did they come from? Their story begins long before villages dotted the valleys or monasteries clung to the cliffs. It's a journey that spans tens of thousands of years, shaped by migrations, isolation, and survival in the face of harsh environments. Archaeological evidence suggests that modern humans first entered the Himalayas around 30,000 to 40,000 years ago. These early pioneers likely followed rivers and valleys into the mountains, drawn by the promise of resources and shelter. But these weren't just any humans. They carried with them genetic adaptations inherited from a mysterious and now extinct group known as the Denisovans. A fragment of a Denisovan jawbone discovered in Tibet revealed their ancient presence in these high-altitude regions. What makes this discovery so groundbreaking is the role Denisovans played in shaping the genetics of today's Himalayan people. A specific gene, EPAS1, critical for surviving at high altitudes, was passed from Denisovans to modern humans through interbreeding. This genetic hammer-down has been called one of the strongest examples of beneficial archaic introgression, a rare but powerful inheritance from an ancient cousin species. Fast forward to around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, and the Himalayan region began to see more permanent human presence. Genetic studies show that populations migrating from northern China, particularly those linked to the Yellow River Basin, began making their way into the Tibetan plateau. These early settlers likely brought with them critical skills like farming and animal domestication, which allowed them to establish villages even in the most unforgiving conditions. But the Himalayas didn't just see a one-way influx of people. Genetic data also shows that around 6,000 to 3,000 years ago, populations on the southern slopes of the Himalayas began mixing with groups from South Asia. This southward gene flow introduced new genetic diversity. But it's important to note that the high-altitude populations, such as the Sherpa and Tibetan people, remained relatively isolated. This isolation played a key role in preserving the genetic adaptations they had inherited and developed over millennia. What's even more fascinating is that the Himalayan people's genetic profile reflects a delicate balance between ancient ancestry and continuous adaptation. Studies of mitochondrial DNA, passed down through maternal lines, and Y-chromosomal DNA, inherited from fathers, reveal a mix of East Asian and South Asian lineages, yet with unique markers found only in the Himalayas. These markers tell a story of ancient bottlenecks, where small, isolated populations survived and thrived despite the odds. So, who are the Himalayan people? They are a living tapestry, woven from threads of Denisovan legacy, northern migrations, and southern influences. Each thread tells a story of survival, adaptation, and resilience in one of the harshest environments on Earth. But their genetic story doesn't end here. In fact, it's just the beginning. As we move deeper into the DNA of these remarkable people, we'll uncover the incredible ways their genes have been fine-tuned for life at extreme altitudes. From oxygen absorption to energy metabolism, their biology holds secrets that could change the way we understand human adaptation. Stay with us as we move closer to the heart of this genetic puzzle. Because the question isn't just where the Himalayan people came from. It's how their ancient journey shaped the biology that allows them to thrive where others struggle to survive. The Himalayan people's story begins thousands of years ago, long before the region became home to the towering peaks we know today. This story is etched not just into history but into their very DNA, a genetic timeline that reveals how they came to inhabit one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Around 40,000 years ago, the first modern humans began migrating out of Africa, spreading across continents and adapting to a variety of environments. Some ventured into East Asia, a journey that would eventually lead their descendants to the high-altitude regions of the Himalayas. But this migration wasn't a straightforward path. For thousands of years, these ancient populations lived in lower-altitude regions, developing agricultural practices and cultural identities that would shape their societies. So when did humans first venture into the Himalayas? Archaeological evidence suggests that permanent habitation above 2,500 meters began roughly 5,200 years ago, coinciding with the introduction of millet farming. However, genetic evidence tells an even richer story. Studies reveal that ancestors of the Himalayan people began adapting to high-altitude conditions as far back as 10,000 years ago, thousands of years before permanent villages were established. This genetic adaptation hints at seasonal migrations or temporary settlements in these regions, where natural selection quietly began its work. What's most fascinating is how these populations interacted with their environment. The harsh conditions of the Himalayas acted as a filter, shaping the genetic makeup of those who stayed. One of the most critical turning points in this journey was the introduction of barley and sheep around 3,600 years ago, both of which were crucial for sustaining life at altitudes of 3,500 meters and above. These innovations marked the true beginning of permanent high-altitude habitation. But where did these early settlers come from? Genetic studies show a deep connection to East Asian populations, particularly those living along the Yellow River in China. Populations from the upper and middle Yellow River region carried genetic traits that would later become critical for survival in the Himalayas. Over time, this East Asian ancestry mixed with local groups, creating a unique genetic profile found only in the people of the Himalayas. Interestingly, these populations didn't remain isolated. Trade routes through the Himalayan valleys brought cultural exchanges and occasional genetic contributions from South Asia and Central Asia. However, despite these interactions, the core genetic identity of the Himalayan people remained remarkably stable over thousands of years. This genetic resilience speaks to the power of natural selection in shaping their ability to thrive at high altitudes. Today, the DNA of the Himalayan people carries the echoes of their ancestors' journey, a journey that spans tens of thousands of years, countless migrations, and incredible challenges. Their story is a testament to human adaptability, revealing how the forces of nature and culture have worked together to shape one of the most unique populations in the world. But this is just the beginning. Next, we'll dive deeper into the genetic adaptations that make the Himalayan people true masters of high-altitude living. These adaptations not only define their identity but also offer a window into the extraordinary power of evolution. The human body is an extraordinary machine, capable of adapting to almost any environment on Earth. But the Himalayas are no ordinary place. With oxygen levels at high altitudes nearly 40% lower than at sea level and frigid temperatures year-round, surviving here requires more than just physical endurance. It demands genetic innovation. So, how have the Himalayan people managed to thrive in such extreme conditions? The answer lies in their DNA. Unlike many lowlanders, whose bodies struggle to adjust to high-altitude hypoxia, Himalayan populations like the Sherpa and Tibetans have evolved unique genetic traits that allow them to live, work, and even excel at altitudes of 3,000 meters or higher. One of the most fascinating genetic adaptations is linked to the EPAS1 gene, often referred to as the super athlete gene. This gene plays a key role in regulating hemoglobin levels in the blood, which is crucial for transporting oxygen. In most humans, exposure to high altitudes triggers a spike in hemoglobin production to compensate for reduced oxygen levels. But too much hemoglobin can make the blood thick and sluggish, increasing the risk of life-threatening conditions like blood clots. Himalayan populations, however, possess a unique version of the EPAS1 gene that prevents this dangerous overproduction of hemoglobin. This adaptation is a game-changer, allowing them to maintain normal blood flow and oxygen delivery even in low-oxygen environments. What's truly remarkable is that this genetic variant is not of entirely modern human origin. It was inherited through an ancient interbreeding event with Denisovans, a now-extinct hominin species. This discovery not only highlights the power of archaic genes but also sheds light on how modern humans have borrowed survival tools from their ancient relatives. Another key adaptation is linked to the EGLN1 gene, which is involved in sensing oxygen levels in the body. This gene has undergone significant natural selection in the Himalayan populations, optimizing their cellular response to hypoxia. By fine-tuning the body's reaction to low oxygen, this genetic trait helps prevent common high-altitude illnesses, such as chronic mountain sickness. But the genetic story doesn't stop there. Himalayan populations also show adaptations in genes associated with energy metabolism, allowing their bodies to extract and utilize energy more efficiently. For example, variations in the TBC1D1 gene have been linked to improved glucose and lipid metabolism, providing a steady energy supply in an environment where food can be scarce and temperatures demand high caloric output. These metabolic efficiencies not only support physical activity but also reduce the risk of cold stress. Interestingly, the adaptations don't just stop at oxygen and energy. Himalayan populations have also evolved genetic traits that enhance immune function and UV protection. Variants in genes like GNPAT and ZBTB20 may play a role in shielding cells from the harsh effects of ultraviolet radiation, which is more intense at higher altitudes. Combined, these adaptations create a biological toolkit that has allowed the Himalayan people to overcome challenges that would overwhelm most humans. So, how long did it take for these adaptations to develop? The evidence suggests that the EPAS1 variant first appeared in Denisovans over 40,000 years ago and entered the modern human gene pool through interbreeding. From there, natural selection took over, favoring individuals with these beneficial traits as they migrated into high-altitude regions. Over the past 10,000 years, these genetic adaptations have become deeply embedded in the Himalayan gene pool, providing a clear example of evolution in action. What's even more fascinating is that these adaptations are not limited to one group. While the Sherpa and Tibetans are the most studied, other Himalayan populations, such as the Layap and Kurtop in Bhutan, and the Thakali and Gael in Nepal, also carry similar genetic signatures. These populations have developed their own unique combinations of adaptations, shaped by local environmental pressures and historical migrations. But what can we learn from these extraordinary genetic traits? Scientists believe that understanding how the Himalayan people have adapted to high-altitude living could have real-world applications for medicine and health. For instance, insights into the EPAS1 and EGLN1 genes could help develop treatments for conditions like chronic hypoxia and altitude sickness, which affect millions of people worldwide. Ultimately, the genetic adaptations of the Himalayan people are more than just a survival mechanism. They are a testament to the power of evolution and the resilience of the human species. In the face of some of the harshest conditions on Earth, these populations have not only survived but thrived, paving the way for new discoveries in biology, medicine, and anthropology. And their story doesn't end here. In the next section, we'll explore how the cultural practices, trade, and interactions of the Himalayan people have intertwined with their genetic history to shape their identity today. The human body is an extraordinary machine, capable of adapting to almost any environment on Earth. But the Himalayas are no ordinary place. With oxygen levels at high altitudes nearly 40% lower than at sea level and frigid temperatures year-round, surviving here requires more than just physical endurance. It demands genetic innovation. So, how have the Himalayan people managed to thrive in such extreme conditions? The answer lies in their DNA. Unlike many lowlanders, whose bodies struggle to adjust to high-altitude hypoxia, Himalayan populations like the Sherpa and Tibetans have evolved unique genetic traits that allow them to live, work, and even excel at altitudes of 3,000 meters or higher. One of the most fascinating genetic adaptations is linked to the EPAS1 gene, often referred to as the super athlete gene. This gene plays a key role in regulating hemoglobin levels in the blood, which is crucial for transporting oxygen. In most humans, exposure to high altitudes triggers a spike in hemoglobin production to compensate for reduced oxygen levels. But too much hemoglobin can make the blood thick and sluggish, increasing the risk of life-threatening conditions like blood clots. Himalayan populations, however, possess a unique version of the EPAS1 gene that prevents this dangerous overproduction of hemoglobin. This adaptation is a game-changer, allowing them to maintain normal blood flow and oxygen delivery even in low-oxygen environments. What's truly remarkable is that this genetic variant is not of entirely modern human origin. It was inherited through an ancient interbreeding event with Denisovans, a now-extinct hominin species. This discovery not only highlights the power of archaic genes but also sheds light on how modern humans have borrowed survival tools from their ancient relatives. Another key adaptation is linked to the EGLN1 gene, which is involved in sensing oxygen levels in the body. This gene has undergone significant natural selection in the Himalayan populations, optimizing their cellular response to hypoxia. By fine-tuning the body's reaction to low oxygen, this genetic trait helps prevent common high-altitude illnesses, such as chronic mountain sickness. But the genetic story doesn't stop there. Himalayan populations also show adaptations in genes associated with energy metabolism, allowing their bodies to extract and utilize energy more efficiently. For example, variations in the TBC1D1 gene have been linked to improved glucose and lipid metabolism, providing a steady energy supply in an environment where food can be scarce and temperatures demand high caloric output. These metabolic efficiencies not only support physical activity but also reduce the risk of cold stress. Interestingly, the adaptations don't just stop at oxygen and energy. Himalayan populations have also evolved genetic traits that enhance immune function and UV protection. Variants in genes like GNPAT and ZBTB20 may play a role in shielding cells from the harsh effects of ultraviolet radiation, which is more intense at higher altitudes. Combined, these adaptations create a biological toolkit that has allowed the Himalayan people to overcome challenges that would overwhelm most humans. So, how long did it take for these adaptations to develop? The evidence suggests that the EPAS1 variant first appeared in Denisovans over 40,000 years ago and entered the modern human gene pool through interbreeding. From there, natural selection took over, favoring individuals with these beneficial traits as they migrated into high-altitude regions. Over the past 10,000 years, these genetic adaptations have become deeply embedded in the Himalayan gene pool, providing a clear example of evolution in action. What's even more fascinating is that these adaptations are not limited to one group. While the Sherpa and Tibetans are the most studied, other Himalayan populations, such as the Layap and Kurtop in Bhutan, and the Thakali and Gael in Nepal, also carry similar genetic signatures. These populations have developed their own unique combinations of adaptations, shaped by local environmental pressures and historical migrations. But what can we learn from these extraordinary genetic traits? Scientists believe that understanding how the Himalayan people have adapted to high-altitude living could have real-world applications for medicine and health. For instance, insights into the EPAS1 and EGLN1 genes could help develop treatments for conditions like chronic hypoxia and altitude sickness, which affect millions of people worldwide. Ultimately, the genetic adaptations of the Himalayan people are more than just a survival mechanism. They are a testament to the power of evolution and the resilience of the human species. In the face of some of the harshest conditions on Earth, these populations have not only survived but thrived, paving the way for new discoveries in biology, medicine, and anthropology. And their story doesn't end here. In the next section, we'll explore how the cultural practices, trade, and interactions of the Himalayan people have intertwined with their genetic history to shape their identity today. The Himalayas, often referred to as the roof of the world, are not just a geographical marvel but also a genetic one. This towering mountain range has been home to a mosaic of human populations, each carrying unique genetic signatures shaped by millennia of migration, isolation, and adaptation. But what makes the genetic diversity of the Himalayan people so fascinating is how it mirrors their complex history, blending ancient lineages with the echoes of recent interactions. To understand this, let's start with a question. How did the first humans reach the Himalayas? Archaeological evidence suggests that humans first ventured into the Himalayan region around 30,000 to 40,000 years ago. These early settlers were likely hunter-gatherers, part of ancient East Asian lineages. Over time, they laid the foundation for what would become the genetic structure of the Himalayan populations. Fast forward to around 10,000 years ago, a time of significant change. As agriculture spread across East Asia, populations began to grow and move, bringing new genetic lineages into the Himalayan region. One of the most influential migrations came from the Yellow River Basin in China, the cradle of early Sino-Tibetan culture. These migrants carried genetic markers linked to the Upper Yellow River Late Neolithic (upper_YR_LN) population, which would become a dominant ancestral source for many Himalayan groups. But migration wasn't a one-way street. The genetic record shows that populations in the Himalayas didn't just receive genetic influences, they also contributed their own. Gene flow from the Himalayas to lowland East and Central Asia has been detected in populations like the Nashi and Yi of China and the Burusho of Pakistan. This back-and-forth movement created a genetic tapestry unlike any other in the world. What makes the Himalayan genetic story even more intriguing is the strong population structure that emerged despite these migrations. Modern-day Himalayan groups, such as the Sherpa, Layap, and Mega, show surprisingly high levels of genetic differentiation. For example, pairwise FST values, measures of genetic distance, between some Himalayan populations exceed those typically seen between European and East Asian populations. Why is this the case? The answer lies in the unique combination of geographic isolation and cultural practices. The rugged terrain of the Himalayas created natural barriers that limited interaction between groups. At the same time, social factors like language, religion, and endogamy reinforced these divisions. For instance, populations like the Lokpu and Monpa in Bhutan show some of the highest levels of genetic isolation, with extensive runs of homozygosity, ROH, indicating ancient bottlenecks and small effective population sizes. Interestingly, not all Himalayan groups share the same levels of isolation. The Sherpa and Tibetans, for example, show evidence of more recent gene flow, both within the region and with lowland East Asian populations. This genetic connectivity is likely due to their involvement in trade and cultural exchange along the ancient Silk Road and other trade routes that crisscross the Himalayas. Another factor contributing to the region's genetic diversity is the dual-route migration model. While some populations, like the Sherpa, descended from groups that migrated directly from the Tibetan Plateau, the northern route, others, like the Tamong and Gurung, appear to have arrived via a southern arc along the foothills of the Himalayas. This southern route introduced genetic elements from both East and South Asia, creating a unique blend of ancestries. This brings us to another fascinating point, the presence of South Asian genetic contributions in certain Himalayan populations. For example, groups like the Chaitrai, Tharu, and Mega show significant admixture with Central and South Asian populations. This admixture likely occurred during the expansion of historical empires, such as the Gupta Empire of India, which exerted cultural and political influence over parts of Nepal and Bhutan. But the South Asian influence didn't stop at genetic contributions. It also left a mark on the uniparental lineages, the mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, and Y chromosome haplogroups. While many high-altitude populations, like the Sherpa, predominantly carry East Asian Y chromosome haplogroups like D1 and O2, lowland and mid-altitude groups show a higher prevalence of South Asian lineages like H1 and R1A. This pattern highlights the deep historical interactions between these regions. At the same time, the Himalayan genetic landscape is shaped by rare but fascinating outliers. For instance, the Toto, a lowland Himalayan group in India, carry a Denisovan introgressed region in the FAM178B gene, linked to hypoxia adaptation. This introgressed haplotype is shared with populations in Oceania, raising intriguing questions about ancient migration and interaction patterns. Another outlier is the Lokpu, whose genetic profile suggests an ancient divergence from other Himalayan groups. The Lokpu appear to have maintained a distinct lineage, with limited gene flow from their neighbors. This makes them a living window into the genetic diversity of early Himalayan settlers. Despite these differences, what unites the Himalayan populations is their resilience and ability to adapt to one of the most challenging environments on Earth. The genetic diversity of these groups is not just a record of their past, it's also a testament to their survival. From the Denisovan-derived EPAS1 gene to the unique metabolic adaptations in TBC1D1, the Himalayas are a living laboratory of human evolution. So, What does the future hold for Himalayan genetic research? Scientists are now turning to advanced tools like ancient DNA analysis and whole genome sequencing to uncover even more layers of this genetic mosaic. By studying ancient genomes from archaeological sites across the region, researchers hope to reconstruct the full story of how the Himalayas became home to such a rich and diverse array of human populations. The genetic diversity of the Himalayan people is more than just a scientific curiosity. It's a reminder of the incredible complexity of human history and evolution. In the next section, we'll explore how cultural practices and trade networks have intertwined with these genetic histories, creating the vibrant and diverse communities we see in the Himalayas today. The Himalayan mountains, harsh, awe-inspiring, and unforgiving. For thousands of years, they've posed a formidable challenge to human habitation. Yet, the people who call these rugged peaks home have thrived, adapting to extreme conditions that most of us can barely imagine. From freezing temperatures to dangerously low oxygen levels, surviving at these altitudes is no small feat. But how exactly have Himalayan populations conquered this seemingly impossible environment? At the heart of their story lies one of the most remarkable examples of human evolution, genetic adaptation to high altitudes. Let's dive into the science behind how these adaptations work and the fascinating discoveries that have come to light. The most iconic adaptation in Himalayan populations is their ability to thrive in hypoxic, or low oxygen, conditions. At high altitudes, oxygen levels are about 40% lower than at sea level, which can cause altitude sickness and, over time, lead to severe health complications. Yet, populations like the Sherpa, Tibetans, and Layap not only survive but thrive in these conditions. The secret lies in their genes. The EPAS1 gene, often referred to as the super athlete gene, is the star of this evolutionary story. What makes EPAS1 so special is its origin. It was inherited from an ancient hominin species, the Denisovans, who lived tens of thousands of years ago. Through a process called archaic introgression, the Denisovan variant of EPAS1 entered the gene pool of modern humans and became a game-changer for high-altitude survival. So, how does this gene work? EPAS1 regulates the production of hemoglobin, the protein in our red blood cells that carries oxygen. Most people living at sea level produce more hemoglobin when exposed to low oxygen, but too much of it can lead to thickened blood and increased risk of stroke or heart failure. The EPAS1 gene, however, allows Himalayan populations to maintain efficient oxygen transport without the harmful side effects. But EPAS1 isn't the only genetic adaptation at play. Another critical gene is EGLN1, which also helps regulate the body's response to low oxygen. Recent studies have shown that EGLN1 mutations found in Himalayan populations predate the EPAS1 adaptation, indicating that these high-altitude people have been evolving their unique physiology for thousands of years. What's even more fascinating is that these adaptations aren't limited to oxygen transport. Himalayan populations exhibit genetic changes in other systems that help them cope with the extreme environment. For example, metabolic adaptations, genes like TBC1D1 and CLTCL1 influence energy utilization, allowing the body to efficiently use glucose and lipids, even in the cold and oxygen-scarce conditions of high altitudes. Immune system enhancements, variants in genes like PAX5 and VTCN1 help fine-tune the immune system, offering protection against the heightened risks of infection and illness in the harsh Himalayan climate. Cardiac efficiency, genes like SYNPO2L play a role in strengthening cardiac muscle function, which is vital for pumping blood effectively in low-oxygen environments. These genetic changes have helped Himalayan populations adapt in ways that go beyond basic survival. They've enabled them to excel. Take the Sherpa, for instance, whose unmatched endurance has made them legendary in the mountaineering world. Researchers have found that the Sherpa's mitochondrial DNA, particularly the M9 haplogroup, is another piece of this puzzle, enhancing energy production at the cellular level. But the story doesn't end with adaptation to altitude. Himalayan populations have also developed resistance to other environmental stresses, such as extreme cold. Genes linked to thermogenesis, the production of heat in the body, have been identified in high-altitude groups, pointing to an evolutionary response to sub-zero temperatures. Of course, these adaptations didn't happen overnight. Genetic evidence suggests that high-altitude populations began diverging from their lowland relatives around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. Over millennia, natural selection acted on advantageous mutations, gradually shaping the unique genetic profiles of Himalayan peoples. Yet, there's another layer to this story: cultural and lifestyle adaptations that complement their genetic evolution. Himalayan diets, for example, are rich in carbohydrates, which provide a quick source of energy in cold and oxygen-poor environments. Traditional practices, such as controlled breathing techniques used in meditation, may also play a role in optimizing oxygen usage. But what about populations that don't live at extreme altitudes? Interestingly, even lowland Himalayan groups, like the Tharo, show traces of these adaptations. This suggests that genetic traits for altitude tolerance may have spread through historical gene flow, connecting high-altitude and lowland populations over time. And let's not forget the role of ancient migration in shaping these adaptations. The Denisovan EPAS1 gene, for instance, could only have reached the Himalayas through interbreeding between Denisovans and early humans tens of thousands of years ago. This interbreeding likely occurred somewhere in East Asia before the descendants of these ancient humans moved into the Himalayan region. But here's a question worth pondering: what does the future hold for these genetic adaptations? As climate change and modernization bring new challenges to the region, will these ancient adaptations still be relevant? Scientists are now studying how environmental and lifestyle changes might affect the genetic health of Himalayan populations, offering a glimpse into the ongoing evolution of these remarkable people. In many ways, the genetic adaptations of Himalayan populations are a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. They remind us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, life finds a way, not just to survive, but to thrive. In the next section, we'll explore how these genetic adaptations have influenced the rich cultural and linguistic diversity of the Himalayas, creating a tapestry of traditions that is as unique and enduring as the mountains themselves. The Himalayas have long been a natural barrier, standing tall between the sprawling plains of South Asia and the vast expanses of East Asia. Yet, they've also been a crossroads, a place where cultures, languages, and genes have intermingled over thousands of years. Behind the rugged peaks and deep valleys lies a fascinating story of migration and genetic mixing that shaped the people of the region. How did these populations get here? And what traces have they left behind in the genes of those who inhabit the Himalayas today? To answer these questions, we need to journey back in time, starting nearly 40,000 years ago. The first clues come from ancient fossils and DNA. Modern humans began spreading out of Africa around 60,000 years ago, eventually reaching South and East Asia. But they weren't alone. Fossils from the Tibetan Plateau, dating back 160,000 years, belong to a mysterious hominin species known as the Denisovans. While Denisovans disappeared long before modern humans arrived, their genetic legacy remains, especially in Himalayan populations. Through interbreeding, early modern humans inherited key Denisovan traits, such as the EPAS1 gene, which played a pivotal role in their survival at high altitudes. Fast forward to around 10,000 years ago. This is when we see the first signs of distinct population structures forming in the Himalayas. During this time, humans began to settle the region permanently, carving out a life in its challenging environment. Genetic evidence shows that Himalayan populations began diverging from their lowland relatives, such as the Han Chinese and South Asian groups, around this time. But the story doesn't end there. Over millennia, waves of migration brought new influences to the region. Archaeological and genetic evidence points to at least two major migration routes into the Himalayas. The first is what scientists call the Northern Route. This migration began in the northern fringes of the Tibetan Plateau, where ancient agricultural communities thrived in the fertile lands along the Yellow River. These farmers, who cultivated barley and millet, moved southward into the high-altitude valleys of the Himalayas around 5,000 years ago. They brought not only their crops but also their genetic markers, which can still be seen in populations like the Sherpa and Tibetans. The second migration route is known as the Southern Route. This involved groups moving along the southern slopes of the Himalayas, following river systems and trade routes. These migrants came from what is now northeastern India and Southeast Asia, bringing with them genetic traits linked to East Asian populations. Today, groups like the Tamang, Gurung, and Megar show clear genetic links to this southern migration. But migration wasn't just a one-way street. The Himalayas also acted as a hub, with genetic influences flowing in multiple directions. For example, Central Asian populations like the Burusha, who live near the Karakoram range, show evidence of Himalayan ancestry dating back over 1,500 years. This gene flow likely coincided with the rise of powerful regional empires, such as the Tibetan Empire and the Gupta Empire in India, which expanded trade and cultural exchanges. Interestingly, while Himalayan populations have absorbed genes from diverse sources, they've also managed to maintain their unique identity. This is due, in part, to the isolating effects of geography. The rugged terrain of the Himalayas created natural barriers that limited interaction between groups, preserving distinct genetic and cultural traits. For example, the Loppu, a small community in Bhutan, show one of the highest levels of genetic differentiation in the world, an indication of prolonged isolation. At the same time, some Himalayan groups were more connected to the outside world than others. The Tharu, who live in the lowlands of Nepal, show substantial genetic mixing with South Asian populations, reflecting centuries of migration and trade along the Indo-Gangetic plains. In contrast, high-altitude groups like the Layap and Sherpa show little to no genetic influence from lowland populations, highlighting the stark differences in connectivity across the region. One particularly fascinating aspect of Himalayan population history is the role of uniparental lineages, genetic markers passed down exclusively through either the maternal or paternal line. Y chromosome analysis reveals a dominance of East Asian haplogroups, such as D1 and O2, among high-altitude populations. These lineages are thought to have spread into the Himalayas during the agricultural expansion from the Tibetan Plateau. On the maternal side, mitochondrial DNA shows a mix of South and East Asian haplogroups, with certain lineages, like M9A, being particularly common among high-altitude groups. These findings suggest that while paternal genetic contributions were largely driven by northern migrations, maternal contributions reflect a more complex interplay of influences from both the north and south. But migration and genetic mixing weren't just shaped by geography. They were also influenced by history. The rise of trade routes, such as the Silk Road, brought new opportunities for interaction between Himalayan populations and their neighbors. Goods, ideas, and even genes flowed along these routes, connecting the region to Central Asia, South Asia, and beyond. One of the most striking examples of this genetic exchange is the presence of Himalayan ancestry in lowland populations like the Yi and Naxi of China. These groups, who live near the eastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau, show clear genetic links to Himalayan populations, likely due to centuries of migration and intermarriage. Yet, despite these connections, the Himalayas remain a region of extraordinary diversity. Today, the genetic makeup of Himalayan populations reflects a rich tapestry of migration, adaptation, and isolation. It's a story that spans thousands of years, weaving together influences from Denisovans, East Asians, Central Asians, and South Asians into a unique genetic legacy. As we continue to uncover the secrets of the Himalayas, one thing becomes clear. This is not just a story of survival. It's a story of connection, of how humans, against all odds, found ways to thrive in one of the most challenging environments on Earth while staying deeply interconnected with the world around them. In the next section, we'll explore how these migratory patterns have influenced the region's linguistic and cultural diversity, highlighting the ways in which history, genetics, and identity intertwine. The Himalayan region, with its harsh high-altitude environment, has been a crucible of human adaptation for thousands of years. Life at elevations above 3,000 meters poses immense challenges. Low oxygen levels, extreme cold, and limited resources create a survival landscape that is anything but forgiving. Yet, the people of the Himalayas have not only survived but thrived, all thanks to the extraordinary power of natural selection. At the heart of this story lies genetic adaptation, which has shaped the physiology of Himalayan populations in remarkable ways. Perhaps the most famous of these adaptations is found in the EPAS1 gene, often referred to as the superathlete gene. This gene helps regulate the body's response to hypoxia, or low oxygen levels, which are a constant challenge at high altitudes. But the real twist: this adaptation didn't evolve entirely within modern humans. Instead, it came from an ancient cousin species, the Denisovans. Through interbreeding tens of thousands of years ago, modern humans inherited a Denisovan-derived version of EPAS1, which gave them a crucial survival advantage. Studies show that this gene is found in nearly 80% of Tibetans and Sherpa, making it one of the strongest examples of beneficial archaic introgression in human evolution. While EPAS1 grabs most of the attention, it's far from the only genetic adaptation that helps Himalayan populations thrive. Another key player is EGLN1, a gene that works alongside EPAS1 to fine-tune the body's response to hypoxia. Research shows that variations in EGLN1 are nearly universal among high-altitude populations like the Tibetans and Sherpa. These adaptations ensure that oxygen delivery to tissues remains efficient, even in the thin air of the Himalayas. What's fascinating is that these genetic changes didn't appear overnight. Scientists estimate that selection on these high-altitude genes began around 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, just as humans were beginning to permanently settle the high-altitude regions of the Himalayas. It's a timeline that aligns closely with the Neolithic expansion and the rise of agriculture in the region. But adaptation to high altitudes goes beyond just oxygen regulation. Himalayan populations also show signs of genetic changes related to metabolism, immunity, and physical endurance, all of which contribute to their ability to survive in this challenging environment. For example, variants in genes like TBC1D1 and CLTCL1 are thought to improve energy efficiency and glucose utilization, allowing individuals to maintain high levels of physical activity in cold, resource-scarce conditions. Immunity also plays a crucial role. Studies of Himalayan genomes have uncovered signals of selection in genes related to immune function, such as PAX5 and VTCN1, which regulate T-cell responses. These adaptations are likely tied to the region's unique disease landscape, where harsh climates and isolated living conditions create distinct challenges for immune defense. Another fascinating aspect of Himalayan adaptation is how these genetic changes vary across different populations within the region. For instance, while high-altitude groups like the Sherpa and Layap show near-universal adaptation to hypoxia, mid-altitude populations, such as the Tamong and Gurung, exhibit a mix of high-altitude traits and lowland genetic markers. This gradient reflects centuries of migration, intermarriage, and genetic mixing, which have shaped the region's genetic diversity. But what about lowland populations? Interestingly, the genetic legacy of Himalayan adaptations isn't confined to the mountains. Groups like the Yi and Naxi in southwestern China, as well as the Burusho in Central Asia, carry small but significant traces of Himalayan genetic signatures. This gene flow likely occurred through ancient trade and migration routes that connected the Himalayas to surrounding regions. One of the most compelling discoveries in recent research is the identification of novel selection signals in Himalayan populations, genes that haven't been studied extensively before. For example, the DISC1 gene, which is involved in brain function and hypoxia response, shows strong evidence of selection in high-altitude groups. Other genes, like CETP, which influences cholesterol metabolism, and ASPHD2, which affects oxygen-binding activity, highlight the complex interplay between genetics and the environment. But how do we know these changes are due to selection? Scientists use tools like genome-wide selection scans to identify regions of the genome that show unusually high levels of differentiation between high-altitude and lowland populations. These scans reveal hotspots of adaptation, genetic regions where natural selection has acted most strongly. Interestingly, not all adaptations in Himalayan populations are tied to their harsh environment. Some may reflect broader patterns of human evolution. For example, variants in M9A, a mitochondrial DNA haplogroup common in high-altitude populations, have been linked to cold tolerance and energy efficiency. However, these traits may have evolved earlier in East Asia before being passed on to Himalayan groups. The story of Himalayan adaptation also highlights the importance of population size and genetic drift. High-altitude groups often have smaller population sizes, which amplifies the effects of both selection and genetic drift. This is especially true for isolated populations like the Lokpu in Bhutan, who show some of the highest levels of genetic differentiation in the world. But adaptation is an ongoing process. As the modern world encroaches on the Himalayas, bringing new lifestyles, diets, and even climates, these populations face new challenges. How will their genetic legacy evolve in the face of these changes? While we may not have all the answers yet, one thing is certain. The people of the Himalayas are living proof of humanity's extraordinary ability to adapt. Their genes tell a story of resilience, innovation, and survival against all odds, a story that continues to unfold with each new discovery. In the next section, We'll explore how these genetic adaptations influence not just survival, but also the daily lives and cultural practices of Himalayan populations, bridging the gap between science and human experience. The story of the Himalayan people is nothing short of extraordinary. From their genetic roots to their incredible adaptations, these high-altitude populations offer a unique glimpse into the intricate interplay between human biology, environment, and culture. Over tens of thousands of years, the people of the Himalayas have evolved to not just survive, but thrive in one of the planet's most extreme environments. Their remarkable journey began with the movement of ancestral East Asian populations into the region. But it wasn't just migration that shaped their destiny. It was their environment. The thin air and freezing temperatures of the Himalayas demanded something more. And so, through natural selection, their genomes were sculpted by the harsh realities of high-altitude living. One of the most fascinating discoveries in this field is how ancient DNA reveals the story of their adaptation. The Denisovan legacy, most famously represented by the EPAS1 gene, is just one piece of the puzzle. Other genes, like EGLN1, DISC1, and even mitochondrial DNA variants, contribute to an intricate biological toolkit that allows Himalayan people to endure low oxygen levels, regulate their metabolism, and resist the unique disease challenges of the region. Together, these adaptations paint a vivid picture of evolutionary resilience. But the genetic narrative doesn't end there. Migration and cultural exchange have played equally significant roles in shaping the diversity of Himalayan populations. Over millennia, trade routes, wars, and conquests brought outsiders to the region, leading to moments of genetic mixing and the diffusion of ideas. From the southern slopes of Nepal to the eastern reaches of Bhutan, this interplay of ancient and modern influences has created the rich tapestry of Himalayan identity. Cultural practices, too, reflect the close relationship between the people and their environment. From agricultural techniques tailored to high-altitude terrains to religious practices that honor the mountains as sacred, the Himalayan way of life is deeply intertwined with its geography. These cultural traits aren't just traditions, they are survival strategies, passed down through generations and refined over thousands of years. Today, the Himalayas remain a living laboratory for scientists seeking to understand human adaptation and resilience. With advances in ancient DNA analysis, researchers are uncovering not just the genetic blueprints of high-altitude populations, but also the deep connections they share with other groups across the globe. The genetic markers found in Himalayan groups extend into neighboring populations like the Yi, Nashi, and even the Burusha, highlighting the region's pivotal role in human migration and evolution. Yet, as awe-inspiring as these genetic adaptations are, they also serve as a stark reminder of the challenges these communities face in the modern world. Climate change, urbanization, and cultural shifts threaten to upend the delicate balance that has sustained Himalayan populations for thousands of years. As the glacier melt and ecosystems shift, the very environment that shaped their genetic legacy is being transformed. Despite these challenges, the resilience of the Himalayan people remains undeniable. Their story is a testament to humanity's ability to adapt, innovate, and persevere. From the ancient Denisovan genes that gave them a survival edge to the cultural practices that continue to define their identities, the Himalayan people remind us of the incredible ways in which humans have shaped, and been shaped by, the world around them. As we look to the future, the lessons of the Himalayas hold relevance for us all. In a rapidly changing world, where adaptation is more crucial than ever, the genetic secrets of the Himalayan people stand as a source of inspiration and insight. Their story is not just about survival, it's about thriving in the face of adversity, a legacy of endurance that echoes across generations and altitudes.